The topic is smart cities and how we can unlock the potential of data, mobility, society and the economy using the region around Belfast itself and Northern Ireland as a living lab. So I've got to ask a few questions, but first of all, I think it's probably worth getting introductions from our 5 panelists. So I'm going to start at the far end with Adrian, who is going to tell you who he is, what he is, and who he works for.
Adrian Johnson, Director of Digital Catapult in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Adrian. Mike.
Mike Dawson, People and Corporate Services Director for Belfast Harbour.
And Mark.
Mark Gillen, Belfast Digital Innovation Commissioner.
My name's Dan West. I am the 25% extra for free in this session. I'm the Chief Digital Information Officer of Health and Social Care in Northern Ireland, and I work at the Department of Health.
And good afternoon, folks. I'm Mark Gibson, Business Development Director for Digital and Smart Places at BT.
And I have to say I'm expecting Dan to be worth at least 25%, if not 30% more than anyone else on the stage, because he's in the centre. OK, next question to go round, and I'll go the same order, is I'd like an interesting fact about Belfast and Northern Ireland in the context of smart cities, communities, or mobility, or living labs. So pretty broad question, say what you like, and we'll add the 5 points up later.
I suppose, Daniel, what I'd say is a greater need for infrastructure investment for mobility and connectivity.
Greater need for infrastructure investment. OK, thank you. Mike.
Mine would be more of a historical note that I think reflects where the city and the north will go in particular, looking at in the 19th century Belfast being referred to as Linenopolis, which I always found interesting. I remember when I first heard it back in the late 90s, saying if you have the right infrastructure and ecosystem in place, how a very small part of the world can deliver big things and be seen as a leader globally.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark.
I think really from my side, Innovation City Belfast, we're looking to create a connected ecosystem. We have 3 districts which we're looking to create: Innovation District, Smart City, and also the Smart Port. And really looking to turbocharge innovation as an incubator and to drive that at scale across the rest of the city and across Northern Ireland as a whole.
Dan.
It's very easy in these sessions at the moment to dwell on the present, given what's going on with COVID and what's happened over the last 18 months. So a bit like colleagues here, I'm going to focus on the future and do something that's a bit more of a positive note, that Northern Ireland is currently engaged in the largest transformation of electronic medical records in secondary care, mental health and social care in Western Europe. And through that, we will have, in the next few years, one of the most advanced digitally enabled secondary care sectors in Europe, which I think is a brilliant point.
It certainly is. Thank you. Mark.
Well, I'd just like to say we have one of the biggest treasures here in terms of a digital ecosystem. We've got lots of players from SMEs to large organizations, and we all know each other. So we've got a great opportunity to really drive and do something which is a lasting legacy coming out of COVID, Brexit and the rest for this region and for all the organizations. So I think we need to really grasp the opportunity and actually do something really meaningful and lasting right now.
I think that point about knowing everybody and the kind of the feeling of intimacy that there is in Northern Ireland and Belfast in particular is actually, yeah, a foundation stone that should be shouted about. But foundations for what? So Mark, we talk about living labs. What's your definition of what a living lab is?
That's a very good question, Daniel. And I suppose everybody has a view of what a living lab is, but I suppose we sometimes talk about R&D, test bed, innovation, trials, all of those things. But for me, I suppose, calling out what a living lab is, if we were to create one in Northern Ireland, the first thing is it has to be user-centric. So it has to be absolutely about changing people's lives, about businesses, organizations cooperating, and really looking at those city challenges and people challenges and making a difference. So living labs really about trying to explore what are those things. And again, we're not trying to boil the ocean. What are the quick wins? Where could we start? Can we start small and develop and those sorts of things? things. The other thing is it has to be open. And I work for BT, but we work with a lot of small suppliers and SMEs, and it's all about how do we remove those barriers of entry for everybody to collaborate. We've got some really good people in the province, and I'm sure they would love to be involved in helping to create and connect. And part of that also we're going to mention later probably is about the data question. How do we orchestrate ease of access to good connectivity, data orchestration, sharing, and build those really good use cases? And I suppose the other thing is, well, we really need to have this attitude of starting, reviewing, adapting. So that whole agile approach of let's start something, pick some really good causes, and actually try them out with real people in real situations in the city, in health, in tourism, in industry, and across those things. And I suppose the last thing I have about that is the Living Lab's only successful if we actually reuse and share the learnings and the services that would come out of that to really stimulate the economy and accelerate that growth and innovation for the area. So Living Labs, maybe for me, just a mixture of all of those things, but really user-centric at this first time.
Does anyone want to kind of pick up on that and agree or disagree? Go on, Adrian first, and then Mark.
Sorry, Mark. No, Daniel, I just want to pick up on the point that Mark, I absolutely agree with what Mark has said. And I think that when we talk about the size and scale of Northern Ireland in terms of its connectivity of organisations, that is a test bed in itself for dealing with the social issues, which are global social issues. The issues that we have in Northern Ireland are exactly the same issues that can be globally scalable. However, the solutions that we can develop here are also globally scalable as well. And it's a real opportunity in terms of Living Lab around the research, the development of new solutions, new digital solutions, and how that can impact on a global scale is actually something that's within our grasp, given COVID and the new ways of working that we've found.
Yeah. Mark.
Having been out of Northern Ireland for just over 22 years, I think sometimes we forget how good we have it here. Yes, we're a small country, but in terms of the ability to collaborate and do things at pace, the agility, Mark, you mentioned, I think is key. In a previous role as CTO of Innovate UK, one of the things that kept me awake at night was how do we demonstrate innovative ideas at scale? Because sometimes to do that, obviously extremely expensive. I think in Northern Ireland we have a real opportunity to be able to demonstrate new ideas, new technology, really transformative tech and product and service at a nation scale, but is still achievable in terms of the price point, in terms of getting that over the line. So I think, here we have the ability to do that. And I think that's certainly from an Innovation City Belfast perspective, something that we're really keen to do, that agility. But I think also there's an opportunity to talk about it for too long. We want to actually deliver results.
So on that, give us some tangible ways of implementing the Living Lab idea. And I think, Mike, coming from the harbour, there must be some opportunities there.
Yeah, sure. It's a key part of the harbour strategy. Fundamentally, it's a trust port. The job is to reinvest all earnings back into the infrastructure of the business. Historically, that would have been done, as you can imagine, out in the port. And the port brings in 70% of all goods into the north here and 20% across the entire island. But what is interesting is we have a footprint of 2,000 acres here in the city. We have only 170 of our own employees, but 23,000 people live and work in the harbour. And really what it represents is almost a city within a city. And gives us an excellent opportunity to sort of hothouse ideas. We're working with the likes of BT, a number of SMEs, to sort of prove out certain concepts and see where they may take us. And we are small, and we make decisions in one building between the board and the executive team. So you can move very, very quickly and fail fast, hopefully not too often, but where it needs be, and then adapt and adjust accordingly. So in practical terms, the work that we're doing and have done in terms of our 5G network ourselves, we're using drone technology for a number of areas. We're looking at smart traffic, both in the harbour estate and how that feeds into the broader city. Body cameras, CCTV, There's a whole range of applications that we're looking at that would then go down further down the path, autonomous vehicles and the like. But it allows not just ourselves, but partners to test those ideas out, those notions, and see where it could potentially take us.
Okay, so we're going off script because we all prepared this. Dan, you're going to say something there.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on a common theme amongst all of those innovations that have just been talked about is data.
Yeah.
The ability to handle and process that data in a joined up and connected way is one of the really big opportunities that we have, I think, in our generation. And I don't feel like I'm overstating the societal issues point to say that the application of that logic and its associated innovations in their healthcare context is one of the biggest problems that this generation has to solve to create economically sustainable services for the next generation. So if I bring out those couple of points, data and healthcare, one of the really practical things that I think we can do through all of the innovation investments that we're making at a regional level is concentrate on how we can connect data sets across different bits of government and different bits of the innovation sector so we can address the societal causes of cost in our economy, particularly when it relates to health and social care. And there's an awful lot that we need to do in order to make that happen. Those words sound like a relatively easy thing for us to just go ahead and do and connect all of these data sets. But actually there's a new era of consent fueled by the galvanization in the public mind of the importance of data. And that consent process will allow us to do different things that we are simply hampered in our ability to do today that fuel a bunch of the innovation that we've already talked about. So that conjoined for me, obviously I'd say this in my role, I'm the Chief Digital Information Officer of Health and Social Care, right? But the data and healthcare are two big generational problems that we can collectively solve in this panel. So
Mark,
I think in addition to the data, which I wholeheartedly agree with, is the regulatory sort of barriers for innovative businesses where we are pushing the boundaries. So when you go from idea to product or service, getting through that regulatory hurdles is key. And actually, maybe people are not aware, but we're in the middle of putting, from a Northern Ireland perspective, a significant spending review bid in on a national facility around regulatory technology, which is there to really try and accelerate from idea to product or service quickly, initially in financial services, but across all sectors, health, transportation, and that, I think, along with the data, are the ways to unlock the barriers to successful innovation.
So, Mike.
No, I was just going to reiterate that it's the governance piece. I think it has to be built in at the front end of things now. It's a consideration, I think, from a human perspective. That's where you meet a lot of resistance. There's a great deal of uncertainty as to what you will do. And if you look in the media more widely, you'll see a number of potential bad actors and how that represents if you're talking to certain people within organizations or boards or political members as well. So that can often be something that holds us back.
So how do you weave that regulatory, the data, the health, all that together to create presumably programs, not just individual little projects? And because we talk about the Living Lab coming back, the Living Lab is the environment in which you're working, but you don't want to do disjointed little bits of work. How do you create that whole? Mark? Yeah.
I think that's the beauty about Northern Ireland is, we have the ability, we're not so big, we can actually work with the key partners, actually a lot of them in this room, and really understand where we have sort of collaborative programs that need to be connected, and where if there's duplication, that it's knowing duplication as opposed to unknown duplication, which is sometimes the case through the rest of the UK. So I think that ability to work in teams and develop those programs at pace is important. And there's other activities running in parallel, one which Adrian's leading on digital twinning through Digital Catapult, which again is very complementary to what we've just been discussing.
Well, I was going to ask that we talk about living labs and we think about the physical side, but of course there is that virtual side, and they need to be set in place and complement each other if you're going to make 1 + 1 = 10. Or that almost sounds like a binary sum, but it's wrong. Where does that kind of leave us? Just tell us a bit about that project, Adrian.
Yeah, so Daniel, as Mark just said, we're also leading on a spending review proposal for the implementation of a national digital twin facility here in Northern Ireland. Again, leveraging off industrial strengths that we have, the connectivity with the public sector, the connectivity that we have with both research institutions, whether it be around the applications of AI for simulation and modelling, if it be around cybersecurity with Queen's University, or around connectivity and cyber-secure connectivity, whether it be around the complex digital twin requirements that the likes of Artemis would have, or Thales, or Spirit Aerosystems around complex product design. And the whole point of that is how can you take a complex product, take it through virtual certification and regulation, potentially regulatory pathways, the concept of reducing the level of prototyping, the level of manufacturing requirements, accelerate the development of new products and services, and do that in a virtual way. So it's really the connectivity of, it is a living lab of some sorts, because the whole idea of a digital twin is that you have a physical asset, so potentially a ship or an aircraft, and you have a digital representation of that. And you can run real-time connectivity between the two, developing real-time data, real-time update of models, utilizing AI and simulation, and do what-ifs. So it's not even just taking the application of that from an aerospace perspective. You can transpose that on top of a smart city. So what can you do around mobility? So, for example, Oslo and Singapore have full digital twin capability for the cities, looking at not just traffic management, but also demographics and movement of people, the applications of health services, health service policy within specific regions of the city. Looking at even Be Secure, talking today about looking at ECG and heart rates, how that data could be utilised for in tandem with traffic management information around pollution and reducing heart stress and defect. And all of that type of activity, it's all of that simulation that you could do, real time, real world simulation you can do, fed with real data.
So how would you put that to use, Mark?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, because I think over the last 18 months, we've had a real culture change. Normally, when you have this sort of type of, let's do something really good around the smart city, smart places, it's in small pockets and you're dragging people along. But everybody's been working from home. They've been communicating in different ways. They've been making choices about, I don't want to do any more of this. I want to do some of this. And why can't I have this information when I need it in this area? So things like digital twins, assets, data assets, real life dynamic information that's location based is what we're now seeking. So we have an opportunity to actually create very user-centric services that are about, I'm working in this environment, in this place, I need this information connected to environmental sensing, AI-driven CCTV, information that's going on around workloads and capacity, connecting to remote experts. All of this stuff can now be done. And I think we're going to see a bit of a revolution about how do we take things like data assets, digital twins, and serve that up to people in really meaningful ways that really make their jobs easier and make the outcomes for those people really, really, really excellent.
So I'm going to ask a question, if anyone's going to volunteer an answer on, if we implement a living lab in the region, we start to do our experiments, we start to learn lots of stuff, we do exactly as you've just described, what will the person on the street start to experience, and when? So when will they start to see those benefits, and what are they? Go on then, Mark.
I'm just going to kick off with this one, and I think this is the important. We need to include the citizen and the people in the journey. And I know certainly with Mark and the others, certainly we're talking about community-based forums, interventions led by those cohorts and those groups. So absolutely, we can't do this in isolation. It has to be with real people in the real scenarios.
Follow on, Adrian.
Daniel, it all comes down to what's the problem we're trying to solve, and that's the problem that's important to the citizens of a city or of a region, and what you're trying to resolve. Whether it's improved health outcomes, whether it's improved mobility, whether it's about greater access to facilities for those with disabilities, for example, or those are the types of issues. It's very difficult to say when they would start to see the benefit of those, obviously, because some of that may need complete transformation of infrastructure. It may need complete change of health systems, health sector.
But you've pointed at the issue that each community has different priority needs. But presumably what we're trying to do here is create an environment in which we can explore what can be done to address each of those and then export the solutions. Is that not the fundamental? Because it is about helping the society in Northern Ireland, but the economy will benefit if you can export your solutions. Mark?
Yeah, so if we take one issue, which is around zero emissions mobility, one of the big issues there is the regulatory environment again of some forms of mobility, personal mobility. And I think that's where we have to use our key strengths. So for instance, the harbour, which is a significant percentage of the Belfast sort of land mass, the ability to demonstrate at scale within a relatively secure environment, in a slightly different regulatory environment, e-mobility solutions, before we, as an incubator, before we broaden them out, say, to the city and then wider afield, working with the regulators along that journey to de-risk any issues along the path, and that is transformative. But there's been a few mobility questions that have been in discussion for well over a decade, and nobody's cracked it in the UK yet. So it's just one example of something that we can do. And I think that's the really exciting thing about the structure that we have and these various districts.
The question about how citizens will feel the results of innovation, it's slightly controversial to say the general accepted view is innovation is good, more innovation is better. I have a different view, and that actually a lot of the innovations that haven't scaled to the point that's already been made here, which would be quite tangible and felt by citizens quite quickly, are not actually the big problems that we collectively should be seeking to solve. The social determinants for healthcare outcomes are more powerful than the healthcare system's ability to correct illness.
Yep.
The really biggest leaps forward that we have made as a society in things like mortality, those macro-level healthcare indicators, have come from warm, dry housing and improving food quality. The real win, which is a little bit ethereal for citizens, at least in the first instance, is about connecting together services across different sectors, connecting together data across different sectors to drive changes in the way we collaborate on changing those social determinants for healthcare outcomes as well as other quality measures for society in Northern Ireland. And for me, it's going to have to remain a little bit ethereal if we're actually trying to solve the really hard existential problems. Solving small innovations is relatively quick and generally quite valuable, but actually isn't going to push the needle in terms of economic sustainability of the society we have here.
So what's the biggest blocker to connectivity and flow of that data? Which I suppose I really should say, what's the biggest blocker to having data that you can use?
So within sector, there are problems.
Yeah.
Within healthcare, there are lots of problems. So getting everybody's house in order is the goal that we should all be working on across all sectors. Solving the regulatory issues and the information governance challenges that we have in sharing information, even at the secondary uses level, I think is one of the big wins that we'll have in the next few years. And health has got a lot of work to do in that space. So I think there's, not wanting to be the management consultant that lectures people on methodology, but I think there's something about starting with strategy, getting the in-house strategy right, showing each other our strategies and allowing them to align through a process of consultation and review, and then getting on with implementation work within sectors and across sectors, which partly answers your question earlier on about how we should try and drive this work forward.
You're talking about a common vision and then collaboration, which we'll come back to, but Adrian, you smiled when I asked that question.
Yeah, I'm going to take it down to an engineering level nearly, back to my old days, but it's nearly about infrastructure as well, and legacy data infrastructure. So if I could use an example, and hopefully not a terrible one, but if you think of Grenfell and you think of digital twins and how you could have simulated what would have happened at Grenfell, and if you to do that, you would have had to have access data from the emergency services, from the Department for Infrastructure, from the Department for Health, demographics about the people that lived in the building, BIM information about the construction of the building itself, traffic management about how quickly it might have taken for emergency services to get to the building at specific periods of time. They're all built on completely different architectures. There's no protocol for how you share that data. There's no protocol around privacy of data, the ethics of application of AI to any of that data. There's existential problems right down at that level that need to be resolved. It's actually one of the things we've talked about on the digital twin program is, could you develop that common infrastructure or way of sharing data, which then could be equally applicable across some of the areas that we've talked about. But it's nearly right down at that point, Whether you look at it from a manufacturing factory basis, or if you look at it from a full smart city basis, they all have the same problem around legacy infrastructure and how to share data across it.
There are two reasons I can think of why those different data sets are incompatible. And one of them is fear of sharing or exposing your intellectual property or exposing yourself to whatever sort of risk. And the other one is linked to that, is the fact that data will be attacked. So how do we address that? Mike?
I think the point you make is the key one. Even within businesses, there is a reluctance sometimes to share information and data, so that is multiplied by a magnitude when you send it outside. Security for us is a big one. We're looking at digital fabric propositions, not just in the harbour, but how that'll be pushed out elsewhere. And the question that will come up immediately when you bring that up is the security around that data. So yes, what you say is absolutely, you want to bring it all together and can prevent those sorts of issues arising. But getting that trust, so it's the person again, and the risk-averse mindset. You say cyber, it builds fear immediately, and that's going to be a challenge. So how do you convert people into that future focus is a challenge.
Oh.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to Mike's comments there. I mean, I think, Dan, you're absolutely right in terms of having those conversations and looking at the strategy. And I think for me personally, it's almost like a two-pronged attack. Whilst we're doing that, it's good to actually start doing taking a small area, looking at certain data sets and modeling and proving the value, the protection, the security, the policy-driven rights, how you secure that sort of stuff. And Mike mentioned about the digital fabric primer. We're looking to work together. And again, that's looking at things like how do you share real-time, dynamic sensor, CCTV, AI-driven information across a number of stakeholders. And the questions we will be asking there is, let's start and do it, and we will be then solving those, hopefully, problems as we go through that, or, well, not call them problems, challenges, in terms of what does that actually mean, and as we bring other people on board, what does that mean for them as well? So that's going to help in a certain way as well, but then we need to look at the wider picture as well. So my mantra is let's just do something and start the actual process of trying it out for real. And that's why I think the Living Lab concept is brilliant. It's where you get to really try something on the ground with real people in real scenarios and get some really results quickly that can help inform and shape the wider strategy as well.
Mark Gillen, yeah.
Yes, so I think COVID has taught us many things, but I think there's still a lot of lessons to learn. So if we look at what happened on the ventilator challenge, we were able to create and develop ventilators within 3.5 weeks, which typically would have taken 3 years to develop following normal process. So we had companies sharing information, sharing data, operating in multiple companies operating in a single environment. And actually, one area that I was involved in, which was called Project Pit Lane, was getting all the Formula One teams operating in one actual facility. And literally, they developed a ventilator in 3.5 weeks from an early stage prototype. And that just wouldn't happen in a normal working environment. So how do we learn from that? How do we allow, companies which were sharing data under normal protocols they would have never done before? And that was a really great showcase of how to fast track from idea to product. And that's something which I still think we need to take a step back and learn from. And there's still work to be done on that. But as a sort of living lab environment for companies to share and fast track, that is definitely something that we have lessons to learn. And I think the other bit I would say about that is we worked in that stage very closely with the MHRA, the medical regulator, who learnt quite a bit along the journey, how to work with the digital twin design when they were used to working very much in a methodical, paper-based, iterative approach. And how do we share, again, that with the various regulators so that we take the digital twin and then we can fast-track ideas with a range of regulators sharing data.
Which has brought us back to the collaboration point, hasn't it? And I suppose the Living Lab as a catalyst for collaboration. And there's a pun in there for anyone who's based in Belfast, has visited the Titanic Quarter and knows what catalysts are doing. Do you think, and I don't know who I'm going to ask this question to at the moment, so brace yourselves. Do you think we can genuinely learn that example that Mark's just outlined and apply it to, say, Mark, telecommunications.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very willing to work with any organisation, and I think rather than working in silos or working in a very narrow view, it's good to collaborate with the key stakeholders and actually drive some value. So I think absolutely we can be quick when we need to, and certainly I know a lot of organisations are willing to put some investment in to see things actually happen. So again, it's really providing an ecosystem or a way or a culture, a collaboration ethos to say, come along, join in, and let's get started.
Okay. Any other comments on that one? Collaboration, good, bad, ugly, indifferent, fantastic.
If I take a swing at it from
Go on
a
then, Dan,
healthcare
and then Mike.
perspective. Sorry. We have, in a weird way, and it is weird to say this, a lot to thank COVID for. The ability to galvanise multiple organisations and sectors around a single problem, and to have that single-minded focus to solve that problem together, and an opportunity to rethink some of the bureaucratic and regulatory functions that normally govern the way we would go about solving those problems in peacetime, was actually pretty refreshing. And being a technologist in that age has been a really interesting experience, certainly for me and others. Maintaining that momentum and trying to prevent elasticity within all systems to snap back to a place that they felt comfortable pre-COVID, I think is really important. That applies to how people work, where people work, to the extent that we maintain momentum on virtual working and those sorts of very just simple measures of innovation. I think the measure of how we collaborate going forwards needs to be taken some big learnings from our experiences during COVID. And going back to my point about it's not the case in my mind, at least, that more innovation is better than less innovation. I think we need the big innovation themes, and Programme for Government gives us a little bit of that. But I think the innovation community in Northern Ireland needs to agree a set of themes that we're really going to try and solve on together, a bit like COVID, and then work on those in a very targeted and focused way. And this goes back to my point about strategy. I'm not talking about spending 18 months navel-gazing and coming up with a whole bunch of documents that sit on the shelf and go dusty. I'm talking about us figuring out what problems we want to try and tackle together.
Yeah.
And the Living Lab's an opportunity to do that, to bring different innovation.
So use the Living Lab initially to set the questions.
Possibly. I think there needs to be a bigger debate in government in Northern Ireland following COVID about what are the big problems we want to solve together. The new Programme for Government gives us a little bit of that, but I think it's probably a bit too diffuse. I think we need to focus on a smaller number of things.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Yeah, just a bit following up on that. The fact is you have a collaboration of the willing as such locally. That's there today. There's an agreed sort of, I suppose, more generic view of what the future holds, and building on that then, if you have that, everyone's maybe 15, 20 minutes away from each other to be able to just knock on a door and have those conversations, each other. So let's get the big questions out there and tackle some of those, back to Mark's point, just start getting some stuff done and show what can be done and add some authenticity to it.
Okay. So I'm conscious that there are literally hundreds of viewers at home watching us, but they will want to know a bit more about what's going on in your mind and in your worlds. We're going to have to use a sample of people from the audience to generate those questions. So out there in the audience, brace yourselves. I'll be coming out and asking if you have any questions. Off the record, I'd be very grateful if you did have some. So start working on those. Meanwhile, back on the stage, big question is where the money's going to come from. And I think you all have started applications for the spending review, but that's not the only show in town. That said, if you have any comments on the spending review and want to share them, that'd be great. Any other sources of revenue, investment, whatever, that you're hoping to draw on, tell us about them. And we'll start at your end, Adrian, because I know you're active.
Yeah, if I could just go back on one really quick point, though. When we talk about collaboration and the collaborations, I think it's fantastic what we talk about, bringing all these collaborations together. The one component that we haven't, and we've touched on it, is the regulators. So we still work towards a regulatory pathway, no matter what the technology is. Regulators need to come back towards the innovation process as well, if we really want to accelerate it. Now, that's probably a bigger conversation, but it's certainly something that we need to be looking at. In terms of the funding, the big challenges that we're talking about, and probably the big challenges that we land on from a Northern Ireland perspective, are big challenges that UK government are looking at. So if you look at the Decarbonisation Fund, £9 billion, for a decarbonisation fund, for race to net zero hydrogen. You know, huge amounts of sums of money associated with that, which is around net zero. So there is funding available. I think what we need to do, and what we started to do really, really well in the last 18 months in Northern Ireland, is to get all key stakeholders partnering appropriately around those key challenges, and accessing that funding from UK Gov as part of that. And I think that's exactly what we've been starting to do over the last sort of 18 months, and you can see the fruits of that in terms of large bids of post 100 million for funding applications going into central government.
Yeah, thanks. That gives an idea of the kind of the order of magnitude we're looking at as well, doesn't it? Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, just picking up from Adrian, I'd say about a year ago, sort of when I was speaking to a number of people in Northern Ireland, it was, we need some bold bids from Northern Ireland into spending review the next time round. And we're certainly putting those bold bids out there. So the spending review is one aspect. Obviously, there's this dealing with the city deal. Talking about Belfast Regional City Deal, in my case, looking at integrating that and spending that wisely, and unlocking it in ways that are going to be transformative for the region. But I mean, I think we're on the verge of something really truly spectacular. Obviously, spending review dependent in some of these aspects, but I'm always the optimist, and we'll see in a number of weeks' time. But the other one thing I would say is the satisfaction of working collaboratively. So one thing I should have said on that piece on the ventilator challenge, Andy Kyle, who was the MD of Mercedes Engines, he said that's the proudest his team has ever been. Forget about the 7 World Championships. Delivering those ventilator, in his case, it was continuous positive air pressure devices, into NHS was the proudest his team were ever felt. And that was the collaborative nature, working at pace. And that's what we want to try and deliver here in Northern Ireland, in the Living Lab, but wider afield. And I think that's something which we look forward to, that proud feeling of working collaboratively together to deliver.
I imagine it's a combination of the collaborative working and the successful outcome, which has immense social purpose.
Absolutely.
So it's the best of all worlds. Mark, were you going to say something else?
Just a slight comment on that is, one of the things we're looking at is how do you, because obviously you have central government funding, you have investment by organisations themselves willing to put money in to develop services. But some of the other models we are looking at as well is people value cloud services, data in other ways, and are willing to pay for it. So if you present it in the right way, we're not talking about an arm and a leg here, we're talking about something that's self-sustaining. So in other words, here's services provided that are of value to you, and they cover the cost of providing those services. I mean, for example, the kiosks you've probably seen around Belfast, the smart kiosks, BT are replacing those at the moment with a new smart street hub, and that's based on an advertising model. So they're completely freestanding, and we'll put them in the areas where people need Wi-Fi. We need sensorization. We can put 5G small cell into them. We can have some health-related use cases as well. But the whole idea is to give something back into the community that actually helps people connect with services and stuff as well. But that's completely freestanding model where the advertising pays for the management, the infrastructure, and the services. But on the back, we get a lot of value. And part of our digital fabric primer will be how do we connect those data sources into that and then make it available to people as well. So there's other models about how people can maybe that sustainability piece. And that's one of the things we're going to have to crack is we've got the green agenda, and also how do we make these things sustainable in terms of cost as well.
So time for a question from the audience if one wants to pop up. If you do, just wave your hand vigorously. And, oh, there's one over there.
So, I have no doubt with the 6 of you at the helm, the Living Lab Belfast will be an enormous success. No doubt about that. But how do you use the Living Lab in Belfast to create a Belfast that's known outside of Northern Ireland? How do you make the Living Lab such that it's a destination for companies, individuals who would be thinking about going to Rotterdam or to Bordeaux
Okay, and for our viewers at home, that was a question which said, how do you make Belfast the living lab that people want to come to from around the world? Because it has unique aspects, presumably, and can do what you can't do elsewhere. Dan?
I'm going to go back to data. I'm like a broken record today, so apologies for that. Northern Ireland is just the right size for innovation. Just less than 2 million heads of population that's broadly static, and therefore we have good longitudinal records. From the healthcare perspective, we've got very good longitudinal digital records going back 20 years that span physical care, mental health and social services, because we're an integrated health and social care system. That's pretty rare globally. And if we can do a better job of leveraging that, and actually to Mark's point earlier, the opportunity to perhaps even contemplate monetizing that, which is a fairly dirty concept historically in health and social care, we have an opportunity to bring people here to do innovation in a way that is fairly unique. And as we continue to improve and iterate on our ability to leverage that data, and we do, finally, the implementation regulations for the Healthcare Data Processing Act in Northern Ireland to deliver a more research-friendly secondary uses capability, then I think Northern Ireland does start to become quite attractive to international innovators. And actually, we're already starting to see that a little bit now, even outside of the context of the Living Lab. So size and data, probably a combination of factors there for me.
Okay. I'm going to go right round. Mark, you twitched there, so that means you're next.
Okay. I think, as said earlier, we're not going to try and boil the ocean in terms of activity. We're really going to concentrate on one or two key aspects. And we talked about regulatory technology, we've talked about digital twin on the data side. We want to be national facility and capability to showcase what can be done at pace. And as the size, we are a perfect size to do that at a scale that's achievable before we go wider afield. And it's not just a national capability. We want to be on the global stage as the world leader in these areas.
So it's being the world leader, kind of demonstrating its implementation and then copying it, but having developed it in the living lab.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mike?
Yeah, our entire strategy is built on, certainly the digital strategy is about enabling. That's what we see the core part of the job to do. So it's really bringing in digital innovations that will be at the leading edge and not just lip service. I mean, that's what we're measured on. So as I said earlier, that reinvestment in profit to be able to showcase that. And then taking a hand ourselves, our own personal investments as a business, working with the SMEs and BT and the like, to be able to just clearly illustrate to people that it's there, it's something you can come and touch and feel. So it brings some belief to that.
So that means kind of capturing the growth effectively, making it
very much so
tangible. Adrian?
Yeah, I'd just say that it's happening at the moment, and two really big examples of this is the Strength in Places programme that's run out of UK Gov. We have two successful consortia in Northern Ireland running projects of global scale. One is Artemis Technologies around net zero marine vehicles. The other one is around Sega Technology, looking at next generation photonics digital devices. Their capabilities are globally scale. That's why the UK Gov have invested over £130 million in both of those projects over the next 5 years. I think what comes from that is the ability to develop a really strong value proposition in consortia. And I think that's what you're starting to see in Belfast when you look at the Living Lab concept, is the capabilities not just from multinationals, but right down through to SMEs and the capabilities within SMEs to start to scale and grow consortia of that sort of stature and nature. That's what drives. That's what'll drive FDI. That's what'll drive more R&D within the public and private sector, and that scale and growth that we're looking for. But I think it's happening already.
That's really helpful examples there. I will get more notes off you afterwards. Mark, finally.
Yeah, I think it's when you look at things like how our growth in virtual production studios has gone. I mean, we weren't really in the movie industry at all years ago, and now we're one of the leading sort of sites for people to come and invest. There's new studio investments, also, and that just shows you the idea of sectors or areas we thought weren't possible to extend, that we have had the space, we've had the people, we've had the investment to actually go and do those. So I think we're attractive as an area where people can actually invest and they will get the support. And then the other piece, I think the culture we have, where we all say we know each other, is we can put people in touch with other people. And I mean that is, we have those connections. So whether it's in a particular sector, we can bring those people together quickly to actually innovate and do that, where there are great ideas that are coming in. So that's very attractive to people, removing the barriers of entry in terms of whether it be mobility or data or those sorts of things, absolutely are attractive. But also the fact that we have a collaborative ethos anyway is really good at helping people connect the dots. And I always say to people when they come to me with a proposition, well, don't come and tell me about your product. Tell me about where we can actually apply it in the city or in the region to actually do something, and then I'll be really interested. So that open door policy is, I think, something that's very part of our culture.
Adrian.
Just one very quick point. I think it's important because we're all too quick to be critical of Northern Ireland Executive at times, and I think what we need to do in this instance is actually to reflect back on the Department for the Economy and the 10X vision that they've developed over the last year, and I think they should be applauded for the fact that they've been quite ambitious in that 10X vision for a decade of innovation. So in fact, Northern Ireland Executive, Department for Economy are willing to back a decade of innovation, of which we're trying to underpin this activity as well. So I think we should reflect on the fact that we've got the backing of the Northern Executive and that vision for what we want to do on a global scale.
That's great. And actually, that with what Mark Gibson just said, begs the next question. People, how do we get the right people and the right numbers of people to be available to this innovative movement that we're assembling? Is it an issue? Is it something that needs to be addressed? There's nodding. And how do we therefore make sure we've got all the people that we really need? Open question. Mike?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. You find there's always a lag to this, and I found it my entire career as industries became popular, the feed through isn't quite there. And you want to avoid a situation where, people are eating their young to get somebody from another company. So it takes a bit of time, but there needs to be a joint up. And in my own experience, there's quite good relationships with the local universities to influence syllabus early as to what you will need to make sure that what is coming out in terms of product is effective. And in addition to that, it's up to businesses to go out there and tell that story. Parents have a massive influence on kids. And in Northern Ireland in particular, there is still an attitude that you must be a lawyer, doctor, accountant.
There's a here from the audience there. Dan, and then Mark.
Yeah, I think we're all a bit schizophrenic on this point about capability development, because if we are out there in the world trying to attract innovation to Northern Ireland, which I'm sure most of the panel members will do or have done, we talk about our university sector and our great graduate programs and the fact that people want to come back and live in Northern Ireland when they have families and all of those, entirely true things. But the reality is we are still always short of capability here. And I think there's something about how we develop capability development frameworks for people who are already here in different sectors. So, I've got the digital angle on things. So if we were to make everybody in the health and social care sector in Northern Ireland slightly more digitally sophisticated and mature, that's going to be a huge win for innovation. So there's something within sectors about how we drive capability development for our staff members so that we all start to operate at the top of our license across all of our sectors, as well as then continuing to promote our universities and the flow through of new talent into the workforce.
And that's actually quite interesting, especially given the post-COVID era where we've got an issue with younger people not thriving as much if they're all working from home because they don't absorb the culture, the knowledge of the grey-haired people around the room. Mark, yeah.
I would just add on, as well as the universities, the apprenticeship schemes and working with the colleges is key too. And again, having spent the last couple of decades in England, I was very pleasantly surprised at the agility from the college base to adapt to the needs of business on the transformative side to sort of refocus courses, etc., just to give us a cohort of potential future sort of staff coming through in an area which actually across the whole of the UK there was very, very little staff there to be had. So I think it's a mix of from postdocs all the way through the apprenticeship side, and it's the universities and colleges working together is key.
Thank you. I'm going to start drawing things to a close now, unless there's another question. Oh, there is a question over here. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. We're not using mics. I'll try and speak up. I came up close to make sure I was taking it all in. Congratulations, great session. I'm glad one person's supporting the Northern Ireland Executive, because I certainly don't hear that from our media. And I think that's one of our problems. One of our biggest problems in Northern Ireland, I've lived over 30 years overseas, so I'm looking at it coming back. I worked for Airbus in Asia, I worked in international business. I, like you, am hugely impressed with the talent and potential here. But if I put a young person in front of the media here, they leave. Of course they leave. Why would you want to stay here when what you see every day remorselessly is negative news? Not helped by our leading parties not even being able to organise press conferences to decide what the next stage of COVID recovery is, for example. Anyway, my point, this is what would you individually do to make Northern Ireland more of a talent magnet, to attract 30-somethings to come back who've had a few years overseas experience, who would recognise, as you've all indicated, the quality of life here and the value for money is astonishingly good, but we don't ever seem to sell that. I know what the price of a house is in East Belfast and one in Wimbledon and London, because I've got two sons in each place. One is 5 times more than the other. It's that simple. So I'm saying, what would you collectively, as people in the audience, do to persuade a young person to come back here?
I think
need to get my eldest son back.
I think you've answered the question yourself, right? I have 2 kids. One of them has just started at grammar school, and one of them is doing her AQE this year. And you've answered the question yourself. We need to get better at selling why Northern Ireland is an awesome place to bring up a young family, or to live generally, but in particular those individuals that you were talking about, those people who've developed talents and really want to apply them in that period of their careers where they're being really effective in society. I think we just need to get better at selling Northern Ireland.
Mark Gillen, you were going to answer that as well.
And rolling on from that, I would also say we've been talking about national facility and capability here in Northern Ireland and the creation of that. For people in that realm who want to have a career in that area, when you have the focal point for R&D and innovation in the UK here, then it's an easy decision. And then when people come here, they go, wow, this is really great. You know, so I think, you know, what we're trying to achieve here really is a magnet to really capture people to come to the region. But once they're in the region, and I mean, you just said it yourself, you know, they see all the great things. And within 10 minutes of walking, you know, landing in say, Belfast City Airport and walking through, I mean, you've got everything on your doorstep. And that is not the case for most places in the UK. There's always something missing. It's rare to see a harbour, airport, universities, hospitals, all the infrastructure, colleges, and golf courses on the doorstep.
Adrian, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah.
How are you going to get your relations to come back?
You know, well, I would say, I agree with everything the guys have said, so I'm not going to repeat that. What I'd say is that, like Dan, I've got teenage sons, and I don't want them to be the diaspora in 15, 20 years' time. So I think what we need to be doing, we continuously do this, and we never take action, which is to talk about, if we're talking digital technologies, and we look at the curriculum in the schools today, and how we get people to be passionate about digital innovation and all the various things that we've talked about today, I know from my son's perspective, they're not enthused by it. You know, so if we're looking to build a future economic growth around digital technologies and digital innovation, we're not preparing our young people today to be innovative and to want to stay here to actually take advantage of the things we're looking to build. I think otherwise we'll have the same conversation in 10 years' time.
Goodness. So that's quite a potent point to, I think, draw things to a close. Unless there are final comments that any of you want to make. No, in which case I will say I thought we were going to draw things together by saying we talked quite a lot about data, about virtual side of things with digital twins, about regulatory. But actually, we've come to the conclusion, I think, that the Living Lab is fundamental to creating that buzz in Belfast that it is begging to have, and it's there for the taking. And that will bring everybody back quite clearly, as long as the media can be brought in, and there's a vested interest over there, I suspect. But so you do your job, and then this lot will make sure that there's the news that you can relay. And that will all make it a fabulous place to be. I already think it is. I think that the collaborative zeal, I think the kind of the trust that exists right across the networks is already there. And I hope that spending reviews are successful, and I wish you, Mark, and your colleagues the best of luck with the Belfast Region City deal. I'd like to thank Mark Gibson and Mark Gillen and Mike Dawson for appearing on stage as 75% of the team. I'd like to thank Dan West for not having his face in lights here, but for turning up and being incredibly interesting from the Department of Health. And last but not least, because I didn't say you were part of the added value, Adrian, but I just glanced up there and saw you weren't in lights. Adrian Johnson from the Digital Catapult, Northern Ireland. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dan.
For coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.